Cows are grazing on grass all day. It's a joke in the industry. Everyone knows that you get strong bones from eating vegetables, especially the green ones. But still in this country, we think we have to drink milk and eat cheese, and that's good for us. Well, the Harvard Nurses study, which tracked over 77,000 nurses, showed that the women who consumed the most calcium from dairy products had a significantly higher risk of bone fracture. So we know that in large studies, this was published, I believe, in the Journal of American Medicine, that there's no justification for us consuming dairy other than for recreational purposes, because, I mean, who doesn't like cheese? It has a lot of casein in it, it has a lot of glutamic and aspartic acid. It's almost like, you know, MSG and morphine put together. And it's meant to be that way. I mean, if your cow, the baby cow doesn't drink it, they're not going to grow up and be big cows and your species will die. And if it doesn't have a narcotic in it, then you might get afraid that you're going to get eaten by a wildebeest and jump off a cliff or something. So there's even morphine in human breast milk, which they can't understand how it gets there. It's not from people who are drug users. So there is something about milk that makes it very pharmacologically active. Although we're the only species I know of that continues to wean after it triples its birth weight, so there's no justification for consuming milk from the perspective of how mammals normally behave. So here's an important thing that really helps debunk the myth of calcium. Now, I'm not arguing that by taking calcium supplements you won't get denser bone. That's well established, and that's why normally when someone says, oh, calcium supplements are good for your bone, they're saying, you know, this sounds crazy, because we know it makes the bone denser. The mechanism behind that has been identified. There is a scientist by the name of Figgis Klontmacher. Sounds kind of a weird name. Sounds like he knows what he's talking about, though. It sounds like a real scientist type. But he has identified the mechanism by which calcium supplements create denser bone. And it's incredible, actually, because it helped me understand quite a lot about why you get that result. And per cell type in our body, you have a fixed number of replication cycles. That's why we all generally die around 75. I think the replicated potential of the human body is something like 130 years. And it is interesting because things like resveratrol actually increase the ability of our cells to divide in a way that is healthy. But with osteoblasts, those are the cells in your bone that build new bone. And what happens is every time we take a significant source of calcium into our body, the osteoblasts respond by laying down new collagen, which will eventually become mineralized bone. And what happens is the calcium is stimulating the osteoblasts to replicate prematurely. So like in Asia, where they consume far less calcium and incidentally have no word for osteoporosis in the Chinese language. So that's such a great example. They're not drinking calcium-rich milk, they're not taking supplements. Well, they have less dense bone than us, and they reach peak bone mass later in life. So they're in a position of being able to say, well, eating fruits and vegetables is probably the answer, because hello, that's what they do. And they're not eating a lot of things we do. But anyway, we have denser bone here because we consume so much calcium. It's creating a replication of the osteoblasts. And earlier in life, yeah, our bones are probably stronger in most cases. Later in life, the osteoclasts get the upper hand because they're younger cells, literally. And so that's where bone turnover decreases, and you end up with a precipitous increase in fracture. So the country, the United States, which consumes more calcium than pretty much anyone in the world, and also has the highest osteoporosis, bone fractures, what I'm talking about. There's the connection, is that yes, calcium does make the bone denser, but it does rapidly age your bone. You reach peak bone mass earlier in life. Later in life, your osteoclasts have gotten the upper hand, so they are breaking the bone down sooner than the osteoblasts can build it up, and you end up with weak bones. And that's been actually proven. According to his research, he has references for every single line of his thesis, and it's just fascinating to me because it helps us understand why he's comparing it to caloric restriction. That's the amazing thing about resveratrol. They found that it actually simulates the effects of caloric restriction on mice. You deprive them of calories and they live longer and they're healthier. Same thing with calcium. Calcium-rich diets stimulate premature aging of the osteoblasts, which makes things look better because things are denser, but you actually end up having weaker bones and more aged bones later in life. So it's about trying to conserve and preserve the replicative potential of our lifetime per cell type, not just bones, other cells as well. So that is helpful, I believe, because it really gives us a better sense of why calcium supplements might not be such a good idea. There are other aspects to this that are really important, like there is the connection with vitamin K. Vitamin K is something that we don't hear a lot about, but you'll be hearing more about it soon because a lot of new research shows that it dramatically reduces bone fracture rate to take vitamin K. And vitamin K is found naturally in green foods primarily, but it's also produced in our gut, and it is found now in some supplements, but it works in tandem with D. If you take a lot of vitamin D and calcium, it will cause hypercalcemia, because D facilitates the entry of the calcium into the blood. But you just don't want that calcium to stay elevated in your blood. You want to go into the right place, and that's where K comes in. Now, K supplements, they don't necessarily increase bone density, but they do reduce bone fracture rate. So again, we're getting into the concept of strength being different from density. There's also the connection with what they call dysbiosis, which is that many of us have an imbalance of good bacteria and bad bacteria in our body. Some of us have been diagnosed, say, with IBS or colitis, or also with colitis, Crohn's. If you were doing a stool sample, you might not find any bifidobacteria. There's a practitioner in town who does this quite often. It's just amazing, because without that bacteria, you can't form a healthy stool. And dysbiosis is very common because we no longer get probiotics on a daily basis. Raw food has probiotics. Organically grown food that hasn't been pasteurized with radiation. So many connections here, but it's important that we do support the flora. And they have shown, it's on my website, greenmedinfo.com, that if you correct the dysbiosis, it will help increase the absorption of the nutrients essential for bone formation. And that's where malabsorption comes in, because a lot of us consume glue all day long. You know, wheat, dairy, corn, and soy are 4 sources for industrial adhesives. Just real quick, I've said it before, I know that wheat is used to produce bookbinding glue, paper mache, and plaster. Elmer's glue is casein, the white protein we all love so much, and then soy they make plywood with instead of the formaldehyde-based adhesives that were very toxic, and then corn gluten is used to produce cardboard. So we're consuming things that are glues, and they will lead to a malabsorption-like syndrome because they coat the delicate villi in our intestine, which are responsible for absorbing all our nutrients, and it's very hard for us to get what we need from our diet. So that's a big part of it as well. Any questions? Anything that I'm not covering or need to cover better?
Quantities, you know, on the flaxseed, would you suggest on a daily basis having a certain number of cups, quarter of a cup, tablespoons? What?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that if you're eating a diet which is 20 to 30% raw vegetables or steamed, stir-fried probably superior, you're going to end up getting phytoestrogens similar to what's in flax. Now, flax does have a huge amount of lignin. It's probably the highest source. So really there, I guess I can make an exception and say a teaspoon to a tablespoon seems to me enough to have a profound effect on my body.
Okay, that's what I used to have.
Yes. But
and on a grapefruit, would you say have a grapefruit every day?
It depends. If you're on medication, you have to be really careful because it does interfere with enzymes necessary to process certain medications. But it depends on your constitution, you know, how your body responds. Vitamin C is huge. Any source of vitamin C from food, and vitamin C is very interesting because if you heat it, it loses some of its efficacy, arguably most of it. So if it's from raw food, it will stimulate what's called hydroxylation, which is the basis for collagen production. You hydroxylate proline and lysine, and that's how you form collagen. So vitamin C